session. The defendant, Mark Twain, and his novel The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn have been charged with promoting racism. Jurors, you are charged with the responsibility of listening and deliberating to reach a verdict. Prosecution, please begin your opening statement.
We ask for your indulgence as we put on trial The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain on charges of excessive racism, discrimination, and offensive slang. This issue is not black and white. We will present positions from both sides of the question. It is no longer enough to give a small smile and explain that this book depicts life in a certain day and age. Many readers find this book very offensive and can barely get past the first few pages without feeling disgusted and putting it aside. If people can barely read it, then how can it be taught in schools, forcing children to read it without giving them a choice, while it contains subject matter that includes mocking the characters and even using the N-word over 215 times in a very harsh and hateful way? How are the students supposed to feel when they are exposed to this word in a novel that is considered classic literature? The word is the word, and there is no way to ignore it. It will always be offensive and will always cause pain to many of the readers who pick up this story. Historically, this word is one of the worst insults you can address to a person of color, even one they seldom use amongst themselves because of its negative connotations. In this book, it is used in a casual conversation like any other noun or verb, with a total disregard for the feelings of the characters. Unfortunately, in the novel, it is used with such frequency that it is given no more notice by the actual characters than if it was a part of their given name. With regard to this book's presence in our classroom, we contend that our nation's educators can no longer teach the subject matter in this novel, saying that the language and situations are acceptable, and then go on to teach world history, spotlighting other cultures' racist and bigoted behaviors, yet continuing to gloss over the hateful attitudes in a book based in the southern regions of our own country. Aside from all the foul language used, there are also many parts of books that belittle African Americans, one of whom is the main character, a slave named Jim. At one point in the story, Huck and Jim are having an argument about different cultures and their languages. Huck tries to tell Jim that people around the world do not always speak the same language as the two of them. He uses analogies and statements that Jim would understand, trying to dumb down the conversation. When Jim still does not comprehend his meaning, Huck is extremely frustrated and ends the argument by saying, "I see it weren't much use wasting words. You can't learn an N-word to argue, so I quit." Could the author not find a better way to address the situation, still making his point and respecting his characters at the same time? This is one example that shows how little respect the white characters have for Jim, a theme that grows more apparent throughout the novel, directed at all those of African American descent. This book contains one of the most famous statements of racial prejudice in modern literature. Huck, impersonating Tom Sawyer, is talking with Aunt Sally about a fabricated steamboat explosion, answering when asked if anyone was hurt in the accident. "No, I'm killed an N-word." "Well, it's lucky, because sometimes people do get hurt," was Aunt Sally's reply. Even women and children, who are seen to be kind and loving, use the N-word and perceive the African American to be less than a human being and not worthy of a sigh of remorse over their passing in Twain's story. For many people, it is difficult to read much of the book where entire paragraphs are dedicated to demonstrating hatred, degradation, and fear. These pages should be filled with glorious imagery of the Old South and tales of the wonder of a freewheeling childhood spent on the Mississippi River. Instead, they are littered with foul language, making the reader wonder, how can this book be taught in our schools, and how can people read this for enjoyment? We ask you, the jury, to listen to the testimonies over the next few days and imagine yourselves in the shoes of the witnesses. How would you feel? Would you be able to ignore these words or these paragraphs, or possibly even whole chapters? Just listen to the words and focus on the emotion when we ask our questions, and when these people remember the terrible things they have read in this book. In the upcoming days, we will prove to you that this book, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, does indeed promote and glorify racism, and therefore should be banned from library and bookstore shelves, educational curriculums, and the literary world.
Defense, please present your opening statement.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we are here because of the novel Huckleberry Finn and the controversy surrounding its text. In 1885, my client, Mark Twain, first published this novel, and ever since, attacks of racism have bombarded this novel. Racism is defined as the belief that characteristics relating to race are inferior to others. I won't stand before you today and say that there are no racist characters or stereotypical terms used in this novel, but what I will say is that this novel is far deeper and more meaningful than the few slurs the prosecution will point out to you. Literature is like a mirror of history, and then an author must reflect the attitudes and opinions of that specific era. Racism and hatred were at an extreme high during the 1800s and early 1900s. Writing a novel with no racists in it would be denying the basic idea of literature. Mr. Twain, however, writes a novel against racism while reflecting the hatred present in that era. This novel is about the story of a young boy and his fight to escape a racist society and free his African American friend from the clutches of slavery. The prosecution will try to hide the true, wholesome, meaningful message laid out in Huck Finn with misinterpreted quotes of what they call racism. We are prepared to show that Mark Twain was simply best representing the dialect of the South post-Civil War. He used this language to underscore the chilling truth about racism in Old South in a satirical manner. In order to show this, a scholar will begin by explaining the book's true meaning and emphasize the importance of this classic, which she calls the greatest anti-racist novel. A Harvard professor and author will testify the importance of this novel in schools and the positive aspects of its story. Finally, Mark Twain himself will defend his writing and show his true motives for this controversial language and explain how the novel is truly an anti-racism story. The prosecution, on the other hand, is prepared to tunnel your vision towards the misuse of one word, the N-word. For them, it's a catch-all. Even though the novel shows no other signs of racism, they're willing to throw that out the window because of one word. If you're willing to open your eyes to this wonderful story, you will truly see it stand against racism.
Prosecution, are you prepared to present your first witness?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, then adjourn the court.
Defense, are you prepared to present your first witness?
You're in charge. Get an answer.
I need an answer, please.
No, Your Honor.
Adjourn the court.
Court is now adjourned for the day and will reconvene on Monday, October 11th.